Hello and welcome to another episode of Bipolar IQ. This is James Norton, and I'm here to talk about bipolar illness and other things involved with that, medication and histories and problems and troubles and elations and powerful experiences. And it's quite a whirlwind of things that go on. And I just want to say I wouldn't give it up for the world. I love it. And I think with a little help, you can make it through. The hard part is at the beginning. Getting used to the illness is exceedingly difficult. It's very draining and it's very depressing and brings a lot of suicidality, brings a lot of elation, brings a lot of money problems, brings a lot of girl problems, brings a lot of boy problems, brings a lot of trouble. But believe me when I say it gets better. I've been dealing with it for 35 years, and I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy because that's rubbish. It's not, and it's never going to be easy. You're never going to have an easy life, and I'm sorry to say that, but I'm just going to be honest. So let me talk about some things that I went through when I first got sick. Okay, so when I was 17, I joined the Army. This was in 1986, and I was pretty glad. I always wanted to be a soldier ever since I was about 5 years old, ever since I started reading about people like George Washington and the Civil War. And then I got older, about 8 years old, and then I really started wanting to be a soldier and started reading about World War II and the things that we did during that great conflict and things other nations did that intrigued me much more, some of the darker stuff. And I thought that was very interesting stuff. And I thought, how could humankind be capable of such things? And I grew even older, 12 and 13 and 14, and started going through puberty. And I was in a boys' school at the time. And the thing about that is that I I was able to get an insight to the upper classes because this is a very expensive school, and I was there basically on a church scholarship, whereas other people were there because their parents were very rich. So I was able to have a very, very good education. And if I couldn't part with anything that I possess now, would be my education. I think my education is the absolute best thing about me, one of the best things I have, and I just love it. And it's important, and it will stick with you, and it's just something you need. And anyway, so then I joined the army when I was 17, and then when I was about 19, things started getting a little weird. I started not sleeping, and I started watching the clock all through the night. And I remember one incident in particular where I was doing some first aid training, and we had to inject a needle into one of our healthy bodies of another soldier to show how to do an IV. And I thought, I can't do that. And so I choked, and they started looking into me a little bit more. And I was like singing. They had me out singing cadence once, and I was singing something about what was it? C-130 rolling down the strip, psychopathic killers on an acid trip. And so they started getting curious about my ideas and my activities outside of the what I was doing, in the military. And they started looking more and more into my life, and they realized that I was into pretty heavy drugs and things. And anyway, and so then after that, I really started just going down a dark place, and I just started being paranoid and people following me, and I couldn't sleep. And the thing that gets you during the mania is the lack of sleep. It just doesn't let you go because you're just there all the time and you just can't let go. It just takes over, and you can't get through it. And anyway, and so that's what happened to me. And then I ended up in the hospital. My platoon sergeant drove me to the hospital in Nuremberg, Germany, which is odd because that's where I ended up living for almost 15 years, much later in life. And anyway, so we did that, and then we went through that, and I went to a hospital, and then I went to Walter Reed, and then I ended up at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center for a couple of years. Well, not for a couple of years, rather more like about 7 months. And then I discharged, and I came out, and I got really sick. And I had my first huge psychotic break. And at this point, it was where my mom had decided that she would tell me that my father had committed suicide. So I go figure, right? And so there's that. And so I had this psychotic break, and I was in the Veterans Administration Hospital here in Salt Lake City for 3 months. And then I was transferred to the state hospital for 9 months. And so I was basically out, without any kind of communication with the outside world for like a year. And, and but when I came out of that, it was like a butterfly coming out of a cocoon. I came out of there and I was just so powerful and so resilient. And so there was just nothing that could stop me. And so I got a one-way ticket to London, and I flew to Europe, and they kicked me out of England because they weren't going to let me stay. And I showed up in black jack boots and long black trench coat, and my hair dyed black, and I guess I answered their question wrong, because when they said, "Well, how long can you stay?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, how long would you like to stay?" And I said, "Well, how long can I stay?" And they didn't much care for that answer. And they said, "Well, we'll give you two choices. You can either go back to America from whence you came, or you can go onto the continent." And I said, "Well, I'm not going back to America. I just came from there." And I said, "Just send me to Paris." And so they were oddly enough convinced with that, and they sent me to Paris. And when I was on the plane, I took my passport and everything, and it's like, then it got really weird. It was like, I get on the ground in Paris, and I took like 3 years of French in high school, and the only thing I could think to say was "Je suis un touriste," and they bought it. They bought it. They just said, "Good enough," and they gave me my passport back, and they gave me my papers back and my money, and I just took a cab, and I never to be seen again. I went into Paris, stayed there for about a week, and then I went back to where I knew people. Well, knew a few people. I mean, I knew this one girl, and I knew some people from my army days in Nuremberg, so I got a train back there. Hopped the fence into my ex-girlfriend's house. She hadn't seen me in 2 years, and she had told some kind of tarot reading that I would go crazy, and she felt vindicated anyway. But I met her up with her again. We spent about a week together, and she just couldn't understand the amazing masses of medications I was taking, and bent her all kinds of out of shape, and she kicked me out. So I was on the street for a little bit, and then I was on the street for a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 days, and then I met another girl named Caroline, and she ended up becoming the love of my life. She was a baroness, and she was the neighbor of a girl who I knew while I was in the army, with a friend of mine who I have recently come back in contact with, and he lives in Berlin now. And they were going to she introduced me, and I met Caroline, and we didn't get along at all, but we had both seen pictures of each other before we met, and I knew for a fact that this was the girl I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. She was amazingly beautiful. She was smart. She was funny. She was clever, and she just painted a brilliant picture. And I said, "This is who I want to be with." And so the next time I saw her, I went out of my way to be as admirable and charming and as appealing as I could. And so when I did that, then kind of she had a reaction, I had a reaction, and we were in her place at this point, and we were listening to some really good music, and like some Beethoven and some Queen and some Beatles and stuff, just some really emotional music. And I said, "Well, I guess I better be going." And she said, "Well, you can stay here." And she knew that I carried, a switchblade, and she was kind of concerned about that. She didn't know me, and she said that she didn't sleep that first night because she slept in her room, and I slept in the front room on the couch. And she said that she didn't sleep at all that first night. But oddly enough, she told me the next night. She said, I don't know, she told me much later. She said, "I didn't sleep that first night, but after the first night, I knew I could trust you, and I knew that you'd never hurt me, and I knew that I was safe as long as you were around." And that being the case, she didn't want to ever let me go. And so when it came to troubles with her dad and things like that, she said, "I need you to be here. As long as I'm here, as long as you're here, I'm safe." And so that's the impression she got from me. And I wanted to live up to that because I always admired her as much as I would hope to. And in the end, I ended up falling madly in love with her. And that's a story for another time. But and that's so basically that's how the illness broke out in me. And just in the idea of time and everything, let's just I just want to give you an idea of how it broke out in me, and how you can understand that this just happens. In men, it happens between the ages of 17 and 25. Generally, in women, it happens between the ages of about 35 and 42. Mental illness is an everyday thing. I think I had what they actually call my mental illness is bipolar schizoaffective, and it affects about 1% of the personality people in the world, or in the country anyway, maybe two. And the bipolar is about 5%. Schizophrenia is about 1%. Manic, the depression, chronic depression. I'm not sure of the numbers, but I know a lot of people because I go to the VA. I've been to the VA hospital at least 100 times in the meanwhile. And I know that there's a lot of chronically depressed people. I know a lot of people that suffer from PTSD. I know a lot of women that suffer from sexual trauma, and a lot of them are my friends because they know that it's just like if you've been in, well, whatever, for lack of a better word, the loony bin, you understand that you have to kind of deal with what you're put up with, and you don't judge people. And although if you ever tell anyone where you've been, you'll be judged, because if there's something out there that has a stigma, it's mental illness. So I would say play it close to the vest until you get to know people, because they will crucify you for it. And it's not pleasant when people judge you for being mentally ill. I wrote a song about it. I actually I'll have to post it sometime. It's a beautiful song. It's called "How Does It Feel?" And I will do that. I have a couple of songs on this website that we recorded in Germany when I lived over there, and maybe you can turn yourself on to those and see what you think. But so that's the end of the second episode of the introduction, second part of the introduction, and the beginning of Bipolar IQ, Living a Life of Extremes. I would like to thank you for your attendance, and I will be here again tomorrow afternoon/evening, and we'll talk again. Have a good night, morning, afternoon, whenever you're listening. Remember, you're loved.